Welcome back to Spinstress in the Makings blog for the Sewcialites quilt along. So we're working on block number 29, the Delight block, and I'm doing the 9-inch block. And for the 9-inch block for your background fabric, you will need one 5-inch square and three 3 1/4 inch squares. For your print, you're going to need another 5-inch square, 3 1/4 inch squares, 2, 3 1/4 by 5-inch rectangles, and 2 3 1/4 inch squares. So we're going to start off with our 5-inch blocks and our 3 1/4 inch squares, and I've drawn lines on the back of my background fabric here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to layer them on top of our same squares that are in our print fabric, making sure that the good sides are sandwiched in between each other, like this. For the smaller blocks, the 3 1/4 inch squares, you are going to need to sew on both sides with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, cut, and then press towards your darker fabric, which is my print fabric. And then for the large 5-inch square, you are going to sew directly on that line. And then you are going to cut with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on one side and discard that leftover piece. And then on the other side, you will have a 5-inch block. So once you have cut these in half and ironed them, these smaller ones are going to be trimmed down to 3 3/4 inch squares. And your large 5-inch block will be a 5-inch square. So I will do those, come back to you, and we will continue. So now that I've trimmed these down to my 2 3/4 inch squares, we can now set up a line of our units together. So we will need our F's, which are our print of our 2 3 inch squares, and you're going to take one of these and then take 2 of your blocks. Make sure that your background fabric is pointing down. The right triangle is in the corner here next to your block, and also the second one will be placed the same way. So your backgrounds will be on the lower side, and then your prints will be on this top part. You're going to sew these together and make one unit of this. I've sewn these pieces together, and now we can take our large 5-inch block and place it like this in this orientation with your print on this side. And we're going to take 2 more of our blocks, our half triangle blocks, and you're going to make sure that your background fabric is touching that print block like this. So we'll sew these 2 together first with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, press it open, and then sew it onto our 5-inch block, and I'll come back when I've completed that. So I finished sewing this part together, and now I've lined up the last few pieces of my block. So you will be taking one of your rectangles and sewing one of your half triangle squares onto the corner or the one side of it. So you want to make sure that your background fabric is touching that big rectangle. And then for the second part, you have your last F fabric, your E rectangle, and then your half triangle square. And you want to make sure that, again, your background fabric is touching the side of your rectangle, and then the print is touching your print triangle. So we'll sew these 2 together with the 1/4 inch seam allowance, 1/4 inch seam allowance there, and we'll have all the pieces to lay out our final block shape. I've sewn all my pieces, my individual unit pieces together, and now we can start combining this whole block. So basically it's going to look a little bit like this, but first you are going to want to sew this top piece on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, press it out, then sew on the bottom piece with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, press it down, and then add this last component piece. So I will come back to you when I've sewn these 2 together, and then we'll finish it up with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on this side of the block. I've sewn these two pieces together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've pressed towards the outside of the block, and now the last piece that I have to do is take this strip, fold it over like this, so with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then probably pressing out towards this thinner strip since there's less seams that I'll have to deal with and it'll lie flatter. So I'll do that, sew that, press it, and we'll be done with this block. Here is the final product of the number 29 Delight block for the Sewcialites. Hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you liked it, please like and subscribe so I can bring you more content. It's a pretty nice block to make, very traditional. And on this back area, I did iron to the smaller strip here just so it'll lay a little flatter. But on some of these seams, I did also iron them open flat as well, just to make sure I don't have as many bumps. So hopefully this video was helpful, and as always, happy quilting.